June 14th, 1944. The jungle outside Mogong steamed under the late morning sun, thick with monsoon mist that clung to the skin like a second layer of sweat. Sergeant Lewis Harland wiped the fog from his glasses with the edge of his sleeve, though it hardly mattered. Visibility never improved in Burma. Even breathing felt like trying to inhale through hot cloth. The Chindits moved in a staggered line behind him, boots sinking into mud so deep it swallowed sound. The Japanese patrol routes had shifted again, and every man in the column felt it, an invisible tightening of the jungle's throat. Harland wasn't supposed to be leading the point team. He was a mortar man, a soft-spoken 29-year-old engineer from Devon, whose calm voice made him the chosen operator of the 2-inch mortar the Chindits hauled through every impossible terrain the Japanese claimed couldn't be crossed. But when their scout went missing 2 nights earlier, likely taken silently by a forward Japanese element, Harland found himself moving at the front, reading the ground with the same cautious instincts he used to read firing angles. Captain Rennick whispered from behind, "Eyes open. We're close to the old railway line. Maps say there's a Japanese clearing about 200 yards north." Maps. Harland almost laughed. In Burma, maps were optimistic sketches made by men who had never fought a yard through these jungles. Trails shifted with rain. Rivers vanished. Clearings appeared where lightning had killed a stand of trees overnight. And Japanese soldiers, well, they were always where you least expected them. The first sign came as a smell, drifting on a still patch of air. Burned rice, like starch charred at the bottom of a pot. Harland lifted a fist, signalling halt. The column froze. He crouched, touching mud still warm beneath his fingertips. Fire pit nearby, maybe multiple. He motioned left. Corporal Daly slid beside him, whispering, "You see something?" "Smell," Harland replied, "and this ground just cooled." Daly nodded. "Means they're close." Closer than any of them wanted. The column shifted silently into a defensive spread. Leaves dripped with warm rain. A cloud of mosquitoes buzzed near Harland's ear as he scanned the undergrowth, focusing on subtle movements. Bamboo bending the wrong way, a shadow that didn't match noise. The faint jingle of a metal canteen, then he saw it, just a flicker. A helmet crest sliding between ferns. Japanese, more than one. Harland signalled again. The Chindits lowered themselves slowly, weapons tightening into shoulders. The enemy patrol walked in disciplined silence, 2 scouts out front, a squad behind them, rifles ready, bayonets fixed. They moved with the calm confidence of men who believed this stretch of jungle belonged entirely to them. But what made Harland's pulse quicken wasn't the squad, it was what they carried. A mortar tube, 2 ammunition carriers, and a spotter with field glasses. A Japanese mortar team in Burma meant trouble, ambushes, harassment fire, sudden destruction from angles impossible to predict. And this team, given their direction, was heading toward the British forward aid station less than half a mile behind them. If they reached firing range, wounded men, helpless, barely able to lift their own heads, would be torn apart. Harland hissed softly. "Can't let them set up. They'll hit the medics first." Captain Rennick's jaw tightened. "We can't risk a firefight. They'll draw reinforcements." Harland looked at the mortar carriers again, his mind already turning through calculations. He had an idea. A terrible one. One the manuals would have called madness, but the jungle didn't care about manuals. He whispered, "Captain, I can take their squad out without firing a single rifle." Rennick raised an eyebrow. "With what?" "Harland, we can't expose ourselves." "With the mortar. You can't drop around here. It'll give away our position." "I won't be firing it traditionally." Rennick stared at him. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Harland swallowed. It sounded stupid even to him. But he'd tested it once in India during training, purely as a curiosity, a private experiment involving timing, gravity, and a very careful understanding of fuse delays. The instructors had called it insane, dangerous. Not to be attempted in any combat scenario. But today, if he didn't attempt it, the aid station would die. He reached into his pack and lifted a single white-marked high-explosive 2-inch mortar round. The fuse delay was short, very short. A standard launch would send it 150 yards, but a hand-timed drop, it would land much, much closer. He whispered, "If I angle the tube straight down, drop the round, let it slide its own depth before hitting the pin, the fuse will arm, but the round will detonate above ground level instead of burrowing." Rennick blinked. "You mean an immediate airburst, at walking height?" "A very low one. Close enough that the concussion hits them before they can react." "And how close does it go off to you?" Harland hesitated. "Closer than I'd like. But if we're prone and behind cover, we'll survive. They won't." Daly whispered, "Sergeant, that's bloody suicide." Harland didn't disagree, but he glanced again at the direction the Japanese squad was moving, toward wounded British men who couldn't even stand. Sometimes stupidity was another word for necessity. Rennick whispered, "If you mistime it." "I won't." The captain looked at him for a long, tense second, then nodded once. "Do it." Harland exhaled slowly. He pulled the mortar tube free, wiping mud from its base, steadying it against the soft ground. Every movement felt amplified. Rain dripping, mud sucking at his knee, the soft click of the safety cap removed from the round. The Japanese squad drew nearer, 20 yards, 15. They were quiet, disciplined, unaware that death sat waiting only meters away, crouched behind a log with a metal tube. Harland tilted the mortar perfectly vertical, the mouth facing downward. The tube, a simple metal cylinder, felt heavier than ever in his hands. He checked the round one last time. A timer, a fuse, a calculation that might kill him. He whispered, "On my mark, get down." Rennick and Daly pressed flat to the earth. The Japanese squad walked into the clearing, their leader raising a hand as he caught the faint imprint of British boot tracks in the mud. Harland released the round. It slid halfway down the tube, a metallic click. Harland threw himself flat. The blast tore through the jungle with a white flash and a concussive wave so violent it felt like the ground itself snapped in half. Leaves exploded upward, birds scattered. The shock rolled through Harland's ribs like a hammer strike. Dirt rained on his back. Silence followed, stunned and absolute. Then, slowly, the sound of things falling. Twigs, mud, pieces of shattered bamboo. Harland lifted his head. Where the Japanese squad stood seconds earlier, a cloud of dust and shredded foliage drifted in lazy spirals. Bodies lay scattered, motionless, weapons blown from their hands. The airburst had detonated at the exact height he had calculated. Perfect. Lethal. Rennick stared at him, mouth slightly open. "Sergeant, what in God's name did you just do?" Harland pushed himself up on shaking arms. "Something very stupid, sir." Daly muttered, "Stupid? You just erased a full Japanese squad." But Harland didn't celebrate. The ringing in his ears faded, replaced by the unmistakable sound he had dreaded. Voices. Japanese voices. More of them. The explosion had not only killed the squad, it had announced the presence of British soldiers in a region the Japanese considered exclusively theirs. And they were coming. Their footsteps multiplied, fast, coordinated, closing like a tightening knot. Harland looked at the captain. "We need to move," he whispered. Rennick nodded. "Back to the river." "Now!" But as they turned to retreat, Harland realized something chilling. The jungle behind them was no longer quiet. Someone else was already there. The jungle pressed in behind them, thick and breathless. But the sudden rustle among the palms made every man stop mid-step. Harland's pulse slowed to a crawl. Shapes waited between the trees, motionless but unmistakably human. The Chindits raised their rifles by instinct, but Rennick lifted a hand sharply. "Hold your fire!" A tense second stretched, then another, until a figure stepped into the open, lean, bearded, wearing a sweat-darkened Gurkha cap tilted low over his eyes. Lieutenant Nirmal Thapa, their liaison to the Nepalese detachment operating parallel to the Chindits, walked forward, with the calm ease of a man strolling through a park rather than a battlefield. "You picked a loud way to say hello, Sergeant Harland," Thapper murmured, eyes glinting with dry humour. Harland let out a shaky breath. "You heard that?" "We heard it at least 3 valleys over. So did half the Japanese regiment." The reassurance evaporated instantly. Behind Thapper, 6 Gurkhas melted from the foliage, each one silent as fog. Their kukris hung like crescents of polished night. One of them, a younger man with a scar across his cheek, pointed toward the west and gestured twice, fast. Thapper nodded grimly. "Column of Japanese moving in. Platoon strength. They're searching for whoever killed their squad." Rennick cursed softly. "How far?" "5 minutes, maybe less. And another group behind them. You've stirred up the hive." Harland closed his mortar case with a clatter he couldn't fully hide. The Gurkhas all turned their attention to him at once, and Thapper raised an eyebrow. "So, you are the one who made the earth kick." "Accidentally," Harland muttered. The younger Gurkha laughed under his breath. "If that was an accident, I hope I never see what you do on purpose." But humour aside, the situation was worsening. The Japanese were converging, and the narrow trails through the undergrowth meant retreat would funnel them directly into ambush positions. Rennick scanned the terrain. "We'll never outrun them," he said. "Options?" Thapper pointed toward a ridge rising to their left, a steep slab of earth twisted with roots and slick from morning rain. "High ground, but it will slow us, and if they flank us—" "They will flank us," Harland cut in. "They'll scatter and circle. They're good at that." Thapper studied him for a moment. "You have a better idea?" Harland glanced back toward the clearing, the shattered remnants of trees still drifting like ash. "We choose the ground. We force them into terrain we control." Daly scoffed quietly. "Harland, we're 8 men. They're 30, maybe 40. Harland wasn't listening. He was remembering the blast, the geometry, the jungle's density. And now, as another distant shout echoed, it hit him. The Japanese would assume the explosion came from a traditional mortar team firing from distance, which meant they would treat the area ahead like a target, not a hiding place. "If we move east," Harland said slowly, "they'll expect us to fall back toward the river. But if we loop south, into the low ravine—" "Into the ravine?" Daly hissed. "That place is a swamp. No visibility, no maneuverability." "Exactly," Harland said. "Mortars don't work well in narrow, tree-choked lowlands. They'll rely on rifles, but their rifles can't penetrate heavy roots, and sound carries strangely there. We can mislead them." Thapper's eyes narrowed. "What do you intend to do in that ravine?" Harland didn't answer immediately. He reached into his pack, withdrawing a mortar round with a blue stripe, a smoke round. Rennick frowned. "Smoke? They'll smell it a mile off." "That's the point, but not the way they think." As the Japanese voices grew louder, broken commands, boots splashing through mud, Harland explained his plan in a fast whisper. By the time he finished, Thapper was staring at him with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "That," Thapper said, "is even more stupid than your first trick." "Yes," Harland said, "but it might save every man here." They moved. The ravine was a cut through the earth, a damp, twisting channel filled with fern beds, exposed roots, and pockets of stagnant water that smelled of rot. The air inside was cooler but deceptively silent. Every footstep sank deep, leaving thick imprints. Harland prayed the Japanese wouldn't see them until too late. He positioned the men behind a fallen tree whose width was nearly the size of a truck. Thick cambium and dense roots formed a natural bunker. The Gurkhas blended instantly into shadows behind angled stones. Harland planted the mortar tube in a bed of mud. Not for firing. He needed it upright as a prop. He placed the smoke round inside but didn't drop it down the barrel. Instead, he rested it halfway into the mouth, fused down, knowing that any bump could arm it. Daly whispered, "If you slip, we all fry." "I won't slip." He tied a thin vine around the exposed rim of the mortar round, stretching it across the ravine, weaving it between roots, and anchoring it to a half-rotten log. A primitive tripwire. A single tug would jerk the round free, drop it on the firing pin, ignite the smoke bomb, and flood the ravine with dense white billows. Thapper watched him work. "And they'll think this is our forward position." "Yes. Mortar smoke looks like displacement. They'll fire into the ravine expecting us to scatter." "But we won't scatter," Thapper said. Harland nodded. "We'll flank around behind them, while they shoot blind." The first Japanese patrol arrived seconds later. Boots hit the ravine floor, harsh commands snapped, a flashlight beam cut through leaves. Harland and the others pressed tight to the ground, barely breathing. The Japanese leader spotted the mortar tube immediately. He shouted. His men rushed forward. One trooper's leg brushed the vine. The round fell. The blast of smoke was instantaneous, thick, choking clouds blasting outward like steam from a ruptured boiler. The Japanese shouted in confusion. The ravine became a storm of white. Rennick hissed, "Move, now!" They slipped like shadows out of the ravine, circling up a narrow animal trail while the Japanese, blinded, fired wildly into roots, mud, and empty branches. Shots cracked overhead. Dirt flew. A ricochet sparked against a stone. Harland led the climb, lungs burning, using roots as handholds. When they reached the ridge's lip, he didn't stop. The Japanese were no longer simply reacting. They were enraged. Smoke billowed below as more troops arrived, shouting questions at one another. Daly gasped. "They'll find the footprints. They'll realize we climbed out." "They will," Harland said. "But too late." They crept deeper along the ridge. The jungle here thinned, the trees spaced wider, exposing glimpses of the ravine below, now a boiling cloud of smoke and movement. Japanese soldiers swarmed like ants, climbing down its edges, searching for the mortar team they believed had fled deeper inside. Harland crouched and studied the terrain ahead. A narrow shelf of rock jutted out, overhanging the ravine. Below it, Japanese troops funneled together, trying to push into the smoke, slipping in mud, shouting warnings. Rennick whispered, "You're not thinking of using another round?" Harland looked up, breath steady. "I have one high explosive left." Daly stared at him. "But you can't. There's no angle. You'd need to—" Thapper interrupted quietly. "He wants to bounce it." Rennick's face twisted. "Bounce it? Off what?" Harland touched the curved rock shelf overhead. "If I can angle the tube just slightly, let the round slide, hit the lip, it could drop straight into the center of their formation." Daly swallowed. "And if your angle is wrong?" "It'll bounce back at us," Rennick finished. Harland met all their eyes. "Their numbers are growing. If they break out of that ravine and get above us, we're finished. This is our shot." The jungle below thundered with Japanese movement, feet splashing, voices tightening. The smoke was thinning, visibility returning. Rennick exhaled. "Do it!" Harland planted the tube against a slanted root, adjusting it by millimeters. He took the last HE round from his pack, weighing it, memorizing its feel, its delay, its timing. He angled it toward the rock lip, calculating the rebound. His hand trembled. Thapper placed a palm on his shoulder. "Breathe, Sergeant." Harland did. Then he dropped the round. A sharp slide of metal. A click. The round shot up the tube's short throat, struck the rock lip with a ringing crack, spun, and vanished into the jungle fog below. For one perfect second, nothing happened. Then the world split open. The explosion erupted inside the ravine, deep, violent, catastrophic. A geyser of mud blasted upward. Japanese soldiers screamed. The shockwave rolled outward, rippling through trees like an invisible fist. Birds tore out of branches. Stones rattled. Harland felt the ridge vibrate beneath him. Rennick ducked instinctively. "Bloody hell!" Thapper whispered. Direct hit. Smoke and debris churned upward. The ravine became chaos. The Japanese line collapsed inward, men falling over one another, disoriented, wounded, scrambling for footholds. Harland waited, counting seconds, listening for regrouping commands. None came, but something else did. A horn, a long, low, resonant call echoing across the canopy. Thapper stiffened. That's not a normal signal. Harland frowned. Then what is it? Thapper looked toward the distant tree line, voice darkening. It means a larger unit is mobilizing. They know they've been struck by a trained mortar team. Harland felt his stomach drop. How large a unit? He asked. Thapper didn't blink. Battalion strength. Harland's face went pale. A battalion? For us? Why? Thapper's answer was barely a whisper. Because they think you're part of Wingate's main force, and they intend to crush you before you link with anyone. Rain began to fall again, slow and heavy, tapping leaves like warning fingers. Below them, wounded Japanese soldiers cried out for medics, but above that, rising through the shifting smoke, came another sound. Boots. Many boots. They were coming. And this time, nothing Harland had done so far would be enough. The rain thickened into heavy curtains as the jungle swelled with noise, branches snapping under synchronized boots, shouted orders bouncing between tree trunks, the clatter of gear and metal echoing through dripping greenery. Harland felt the vibrations through the earth before he truly heard them. A battalion on the move had weight, purpose. A kind of terrible confidence that smaller patrols lacked. Rennick crouched beside him, scanning the dark slopes below. They're tightening the radius. They mean to box us in. Thapper peered through the foliage, jaw stiff. They'll drive search teams up the ravine's left flank. Others will circle wide. They assume we're retreating toward the river. And they'll try to corner us against it. Harland's breathing steadied, despite the rising tension. We need to vanish. Make them believe we fled. Leave no impression of direction. Daly muttered. And how do we do that with 8 men and the entire Imperial Army breathing down our necks? Harland's mind was already turning. The jungle wasn't a threat. It was a weapon. A maze of sound, visibility, deception. He crouched lower, fingers brushing loose soil. Something clicked in his head. The Japanese battalion wasn't expecting a fight. They were expecting pursuit. Which meant they were vulnerable to fear. Fear of an unseen enemy, a hidden mortar team, an ambush that wasn't real but felt real. We make them think Wingate's full brigade is around us, Harland said quietly. We make noise, many kinds, in many places. We make them hesitate. Thapper nodded slowly. Fear is a powerful ally. Rennick frowned. And what will you use to create many kinds of noise? You're out of rounds. Harland glanced at the jungle floor. Bamboo. Hollow. Perfectly shaped. Perfect for wind resonance. We manufacture echoes, he said simply. In the thick, wet shadows, the men worked fast. Harland broke lengths of bamboo, cutting them into tubes of different diameters. Some were thin and high-pitched, others deep and wide. They lashed them to tree trunks with vines, positioned them at slight angles so wind rolling through the jungle would vibrate the hollow chambers. Within minutes, the first eerie tones drifted, low, mournful hums layered under higher whistles. The sounds merged into something strange and unnatural, as if a dozen instruments, none quite human, played from unseen directions. The rain carried those tones deeper into the forest, dispersing them across multiple ridges. Daly blinked. Makes my bloody hair stand up. They'll think it's signal calls, Harland whispered, or communication between scattered Chindit groups. And your trick doesn't require bullets, Thapper said approvingly. Only wind. But the Japanese were still advancing, shadows weaving between trees, metal glinting beneath dripping leaves. As they neared the ravine, the unnatural hum of bamboo drifted around them. Men halted, heads turned, commands rang out, confused, tense. They adjusted formation, rifles raised, expecting ambushes that didn't exist. Harland motioned the group away from the ridge. They climbed deeper into the higher ground, slipping through ferns like ghosts. Every few minutes Thapper paused, listening for enemy scouts, then signaled directions with quick, precise gestures. Yet the Japanese were adapting faster than Harland hoped. The unnatural tones weren't enough. More boots approached, more men. The battalion commander was pushing his troops aggressively. The jungle trembled with their advance. "We need to give them something concrete," Harland whispered. "Concrete?" Daly asked. "How's that?" "A reason to stop charging blindly." He scanned the wet earth, searching for anything useful. His gaze landed on a dead tree, splintered by lightning, hollow at its core, its jagged trunk still standing like a broken spear. Harland jogged to it, wiping water from his glasses. A tree like this, hollowed out, could be used to amplify sound. A lot of sound. Thapper approached. "You intend to create a second explosion." "Not a real one," Harland said, "but one they'll believe is real." He directed the men to gather large stones, laying them inside the hollow trunk. Then he wedged 2 bamboo chambers inside, angled upward. When wind swept across them, the sound it produced mimicked distant artillery thumps, deep, percussive, unsettling. Harland tested the angles, adjusting by inches. The bamboo resonated, emitting a rumbling pulse that shuddered down the slope. Daly stepped back. "That sounds like a blooming howitzer in the next valley." "That's what I'm counting on," Harland murmured. The Japanese halted again. Shouts echoed, confusion rippled through their lines. Harland watched from the ridge above, rain dripping from his helmet. The battalion commander conferred with his officers, clearly uncertain now whether he faced 8 men or 800. Then something happened that threatened to break Harland's fragile illusion. A Japanese scout, low-crawling, silent, single-minded, was climbing right toward their ridge position. Thapper's grip tightened on his kukri. "If he reaches us, he'll signal the battalion. They'll charge." Harland nodded. "We can't let him call out." Rennick whispered. "Do we take him down quietly?" Harland watched the scout's careful approach, the practiced rhythm, the way he probed the ground ahead with his fingertips. This was no green soldier. This was a hunter. He would not hesitate. Harland exhaled slowly. "I'll do it." He moved like a shadow, lowering himself into the brush. Rain masked his scent and steps. The scout reached a fallen branch, pausing to adjust his Arisaka rifle. Harland slipped behind him, heart thudding. For a moment, time slowed. The soldier just inches away, unaware, focused, committed. Harland struck fast, clamping a hand around the soldier's mouth, pulling him back into the foliage. The jungle swallowed the struggle in seconds. When Harland emerged, his face was pale and his hands shook. Daly looked at him, eyes heavy. "You all right?" Harland nodded, though the tremor in his fingers said otherwise. Killing from afar, through smoke and timing, was one thing. Killing up close, feeling the life leave a man, was something else entirely. He wiped his hands on his trousers. "We need to move." That scout was ahead of the others. They pressed deeper into the ridge, weaving through tight clusters of palm leaves. But the rain was easing now, and with it the bamboo tones shifted, becoming less masked, less haunting. The Japanese were learning, slowly distinguishing the artificial hums from real signals. Rennick pressed a hand to Harland's shoulder. "Your tricks bought us time, but we're running out." It was true. The battalion was reorganizing. Torches flickered through the trees. Sappers moved ahead, clearing brush. Officers barked orders with rising certainty. Thapper listened to the movement patterns. They're preparing a sweep, a full push north to south. They think they've trapped us between 2 ravines. Harland's eyes lifted. Between 2 ravines. A new idea crystallized. Dangerous, insane, but possibly decisive. He pointed toward the wider ravine ahead, deeper, broader, and littered with massive banyan roots. "If we get them to chase us into that ravine, we can trigger a landslide." Rennick blinked. A landslide? With what explosives, Harland? Not explosives, Harland said. Water. They approached the ravine carefully. Rain had swollen the upper pools, muddy basins perched dangerously above the gully, held back only by tangled roots and soft earth. If those roots snapped, a wall of mud and water would roar downward like a freight train. All we need, Harland said quietly, is to weaken the holding roots. A controlled release. They'll be shoulder deep in mud before they know what hit them. Daly stared. Harland, if we misjudge the angle or timing, we'll be buried too. That's why we go through first, Harland said, and lure them in. The plan formed quickly. Thapper and 2 Gurkhas took positions behind thick trunks overlooking the ravine, prepared to slice the final roots on Harland's signal. Harland, Rennick, Daly, and the remaining men moved visibly across an exposed ridge above the ravine, briefly, just long enough to let Japanese scouts glimpse them. Shouts rose immediately. Movement accelerated. The Japanese were coming, fast, angry, relentless. Harland led the group into the ravine, splashing through muck, boots sinking. The walls rose sharply around them. Mud sucked at their ankles. Come on, Harland whispered. Just a little closer. The Japanese scouts reached the ridge edge, peering down, rifles raised. More troops followed, funneling into the funnel-shaped slope. Harland raised his hand. Thapper and his men struck. 3 kukris cleaved through the main supporting roots. A crack echoed across the jungle, deep, ancient, final. Then the world moved. The mud wall above buckled, sagged, then tore free. A surge of brown water thundered downward, ripping vines, roots, stones, everything in its path. Harland shouted, "Run!" The Chindits scrambled up the far wall of the ravine, fingers clawing mud, boots slipping, adrenaline drowning every ache. Behind them, the Japanese battalion charged directly into the roaring flood. The mudslide hit them like a collapsing building. Screams tore through the chaos. Rifles vanished beneath churning brown water. Mud swallowed legs. Men toppled, swept away in a violent rush. Harland reached the top, gasping, covered in earth. Rennick pulled Daly up beside him. Thapper emerged moments later, stained head to toe, but alive. They watched the ravine below, a boiling sea of mud burying soldiers, equipment, everything. Rennick whispered, "Dear God." Harland's chest heaved as he stared. Not victory, not triumph, just survival. The mudslide slowed, leaving devastation in its wake. Distant shouts told them some Japanese had survived farther down the ravine, but the battalion's thrust had been broken completely. They would not pursue again today. Not after this. Thapper placed a hand on Harland's shoulder. "You saved us." Harland shook his head. "No, the jungle saved us. I only listened to it." Rain began again, gentle now, cleansing, softening the edges of shattered earth. Rennick exhaled. "Let's move. By dawn we reach friendly lines." As they disappeared into the dripping forest, Harland paused once more at the ravine's edge. His mortar tricks, mocked, dismissed, labelled foolish, had somehow kept them alive long enough for the jungle to take the rest. He whispered into the rain, not as a soldier, but as a man who had seen too much. "Call it stupid if you want, but it worked." And with that, he followed the others into the green shadows, the jungle closing behind them, erasing every trace of the fight, leaving only echoes of a handful of men who challenged an entire battalion with nothing but wit, fear, and a so-called stupid trick.